They spent 190,000 talents on champagne towers and designer dresses, while my 6-year-old son lay dying in a hospital bed, needing just 70,000 talents to survive. When I begged my own parents to choose between a wedding and my child's life, they looked me in the eyes and chose the party. This is the story of how my family's betrayal almost killed my son, and how I made them pay for every single pound they refused to give. If you want to see how this unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Everything changed on a bitter Friday evening in Manchester when those words left the doctor's lips: acute cardiac failure. My son Thomas was barely 6 years old, and his heart was giving up. I remember that moment with painful clarity. We'd been in the hospital for 3 days already, running tests, waiting for answers. Thomas had been complaining of chest pains for weeks, and I'd taken him to our GP multiple times. Each time, they'd told me it was probably growing pains, anxiety, or perhaps a minor infection. But that Friday, when the cardiologist finally sat me down in that small, sterile consultation room with its flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air, everything fell apart. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice gentle but grave, "Thomas has a severe congenital heart defect that we somehow missed in his earlier screenings. His left ventricle is failing, and his heart is working at barely 30% capacity." I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt. "What does that mean?" I managed to whisper. "It means he needs surgery, urgently, within the next 3 to 4 weeks, or his heart will give out completely. The procedure is complex. We need to repair the valve and reinforce the ventricle wall. The cost, including the surgery, post-operative care, and the specialized team we'll need to bring in, comes to approximately £70,000. £70,000. I was a single mother working as a primary school teacher in Salford. I had maybe 3,000 talents in savings, money I'd been putting aside for Thomas's future education. The number felt impossible, insurmountable, crushing. But I had family, or so I thought. My parents, Richard and Margaret Bennett, had always been my foundation. They lived in a beautiful home in the suburbs of Leeds, the kind of house with a perfectly manicured garden and a driveway that could fit 3 cars. They weren't wealthy by millionaire standards, but they were comfortable, very comfortable. My father had been a successful property developer before retiring, and my mother had worked as a senior administrator for the NHS. They'd always made it clear they'd worked hard for their money, but they'd also always said family came first. Growing up, they were the ones I turned to when life got hard. When Thomas's father left us when he was just 2 years old, they helped me get back on my feet. They babysat when I needed to work late. They were there for birthdays and school plays. I genuinely believed they would move heaven and earth for their grandson. I was devastatingly wrong. That first night after the diagnosis, I sat in my car in the hospital car park for 20 minutes, trying to compose myself before calling my mother. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. When she finally answered, I could hear music and laughter in the background. "Mum, it's me. I need to talk to you. It's urgent." "Oh, Emily, darling, we're just at the Ivy with Sophie and Oliver's parents. Can it wait until tomorrow?" "No, Mum, it can't. It's about Thomas." Her tone shifted slightly, but not to concern, more to mild annoyance at the interruption. "What's happened?" "Thomas has acute cardiac failure. His heart is failing, Mum. He needs surgery in the next few weeks or he'll die. It costs £70,000, and I don't have that kind of money. I need your help." There was a pause, too long, too cold. I could hear her move away from the noise, a door closing. "Oh, Emily, that's terrible," she said, her voice oddly measured, as if she were discussing a cancelled holiday rather than her grandson's life. "But can we discuss this properly tomorrow? We're just heading out to Sophie's final dress fitting after dinner. You know how important her wedding is. It's only 6 weeks away now." My heart sank into my stomach. "Mum, did you hear what I just said? Thomas might die. I need help now. I need you and Dad to help me save your grandson." Another pause. Then her tone shifted, becoming almost defensive, slightly irritated. "Emily, I understand you're frightened, but you need to calm down. It's just, well, we've committed nearly 190,000 talents to Sophie's wedding. The deposits are all paid, the venue is booked, the caterers are confirmed. It's a huge expense, and with everything already allocated, it's simply not possible right now to find that kind of money." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Are you seriously telling me that Sophie's wedding is more important than Thomas's life?" My father's voice cut in from the background. She must have put me on speaker. Emily, you're being hysterical. We have to think about the family's standing in the community. These commitments matter. Sophie's wedding is at Harewood House, for God's sake. The Ashfords are expecting a certain standard. We can't just cancel or scale back at this stage. Besides, surely the NHS covers this sort of thing. The surgery needs to be done privately because of the urgency and the specialists involved. The NHS waiting list is 6 months. Well, perhaps you should have taken out better insurance. Since when he was born, my mother said coolly. These are the consequences of choices, Emily. I stood there in that cold car park, phone pressed to my ear, unable to breathe, unable to process what I was hearing. My son's survival depended on money my parents were choosing to spend on ice sculptures, vintage Rolls Royces, a dress that cost $12,000, and a 12-piece orchestra. They were choosing a party over their grandson's life. I have to go, I whispered, ending the call before they could hear me break down completely. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. I spent every waking hour at Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, in a small room in the cardiac ward that had become our temporary home. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow with cartoon characters that seemed to mock the gravity of our situation. Thomas lay in the bed, looking impossibly small beneath the thin hospital blankets. Wires connected him to monitors that beeped constantly, tracking his heart rate, his oxygen levels, his blood pressure. An IV drip fed medications into his small arm, and every few hours, nurses would come in to check his vital signs and adjust his treatment. He tried to be brave. He'd always been such a bright, cheerful little boy, the kind of child who found joy in everything, who made friends with everyone, who saw the world as a magical place full of possibilities. Now he was confused and frightened, asking questions I couldn't answer. "Mummy, why does my chest hurt all the time?" "The doctors are working on making it better, sweetheart." "When can I go back to school? I'm missing football practice." "Soon, my love, very soon." But I didn't know if soon would ever come. Meanwhile, my parents' social media accounts had become an endless parade of wedding preparations, and each post felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. My mother posted photos of Sophie's dress, a custom Vera Wang creation from an exclusive London boutique, complete with hand-sewn pearls and chantilly lace. The caption read, "My beautiful daughter deserves nothing but the best. Only 6 weeks until the big day. # mother of the bride. # proud mum. # Bennett wedding." There were pictures of the venue, Harewood House in Yorkshire, a stunning stately home with manicured gardens, a lake complete with swans, and centuries of history. The ceremony would be in the private chapel, the reception in the grand ballroom, photos of menu tastings at restaurants with Michelin stars, Sophie posing with wedding planners, the save-the-date cards that had been sent to 200 guests, the wedding favors, small crystal boxes with each guest's name engraved on them. My father posted pictures of the vintage car collection that would transport the wedding party, 3 Rolls Royces from the 1930s, polished to perfection. The hashtags burned into my vision every time I made the mistake of looking #Sophie and Oliver forever, #Bennett, wedding, #family first, #blessed, family, generational wealth, family first, blessed family. The irony was suffocating, crushing, unbearable. I tried to focus on Thomas, on being present for him, but in the quiet moments, late at night when he was sleeping and the hospital corridor lights were dimmed, I would look at those posts and feel something dark and furious growing inside me. How could they do this? How could they smile for those photos while their grandson fought for every heartbeat? One sleepless night at the hospital, around 2 a.m, when the world felt impossibly quiet and heavy, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. At that hour, it was usually someone with bad news, but something made me pick up. "Emily Carter?" The voice was female, hesitant, almost frightened. "Yes? Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a nurse on the cardiac ward here at the hospital. I need to tell you something about your parents, but you can't tell anyone this came from me. I could lose my job." My pulse quickened. I stepped out into the corridor, away from Thomas's room. "What is it? What about my parents?" "I've been working here for 12 years, she said carefully, "and I've seen a lot of families face impossible situations. But something about your case has been bothering me ever since I overheard your mother speaking with one of our finance administrators last week. What did you hear? She came in to inquire about payment plans and NHS funding options. She spent an hour with the administrator, asking very specific questions about costs and payment structures. Then, just as they were finishing up, she said something that made me pause. Sarah took a breath, as if gathering courage. She said, "Well, it's unfortunate, but we simply cannot compromise on the wedding expenses. The Ashfords are expecting a certain standard, and we can't afford to lose face with them. Perhaps if the hospital can extend their timeline, we might be able to help after the wedding." I felt cold all over. She said that? She actually said they might help after the wedding. Yes, but Emily, there's more. I've seen this before. Families hiding financial problems behind expensive celebrations. That same day, I was in the corridor when your father took a phone call. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but he was quite loud. He was talking about debts, about pressure from Oliver's family, about the wedding being non-negotiable. My head was spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying your parents aren't just choosing the wedding over Thomas because they care more about appearances. I think they're trapped in something bigger. The wedding isn't generosity, it's obligation, and your son is paying the price for whatever deal they've made. That conversation changed everything. Driven by desperation, fury, and a growing need for truth, I began investigating my own family. It wasn't easy. I didn't have access to their bank accounts or financial records, but I did have something else, years of accumulated family documents that I'd never bothered to go through. When my grandmother passed away 2 years earlier, I'd inherited boxes of old family papers that had been stored in her attic. Letters, photographs, receipts, bank statements, decades of Bennett family history that I'd put in my own storage unit, intending to sort through them someday. Now I pulled them out, searching for answers. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. The financial trail was complex and disturbing. Old bank statements showed that my father had borrowed heavily over the years, not from banks, but from private individuals. One name kept appearing, Charles Ashford, Oliver's father. Letters between my father and Charles revealed a business deal gone wrong 15 years ago. My father had been involved in a property development scheme that had collapsed, leaving several investors out of pocket. Charles Ashford had been one of them, losing nearly 300,000 talents. Rather than pursuing legal action, Charles had accepted a series of private loans with interest rates that could only be described as predatory. Over the years, my father had paid back some of the money, but the debt had ballooned to nearly £500,000. And then Sophie had met Oliver. Suddenly, a marriage between the Bennett and Ashford families was being arranged, not overtly, but through careful social engineering. The wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a peace offering, a public display of the Bennett family's wealth and standing, proof that they were still worthy of associating with families like the Ashfords. The 190,000 talent wedding wasn't generosity towards Sophie. It was my father's desperate attempt to save face and perhaps negotiate a reduction in his debt. Thomas's surgery was collateral damage in a game of pride, power, and financial survival that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with reputation. But there was something else in those boxes, something that explained the deeper coldness I'd always felt from my parents. Tucked in an envelope marked Private 1994 were letters between my mother and father, written the year I was born, or rather the year I came into their lives. As I read them, the world tilted beneath me. I was adopted. My parents had taken me in as a baby through a private adoption arrangement. The letters revealed that they'd struggled with infertility for years before deciding to adopt. But even as they brought me home, there were doubts. "I'm not sure I can love her the way I would love my own child," my mother had written. "Is that terrible to admit? She's a beautiful baby, and I want to do right by her, but there's a distance I can't quite bridge." My father's response, "Give it time. She's a responsibility we've taken on, and we'll fulfill that responsibility. Perhaps one day we'll be blessed with a child of our own." And then, 3 years after they adopted me, Sophie was born, their biological daughter, the child they'd prayed for. Suddenly, everything made sense. The subtle differences in how they treated us. The birthdays celebrated with half-hearted enthusiasm for me versus the elaborate parties for Sophie. The way they beamed with pride at Sophie's achievements while offering polite praise for mine. Sophie had been their miracle. I had been their obligation. And now, when my son, their grandson, needed them most, that old truth revealed itself in the cruelest way possible. I wasn't really their daughter. Thomas wasn't really their grandson. We were just people they'd once felt obligated to care for, but never truly loved. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't let this injustice stand. But I also couldn't let Thomas suffer while I fought. So I did what I had to do. I swallowed every ounce of pride I had left and launched a crowdfunding campaign. My best friend Lucy helped me set it up. We created a page explaining Thomas's condition, the urgency of the surgery, and the impossible financial situation we faced. I posted photos of Thomas, his bright smile from before he got sick, his brave little face in the hospital bed. Within hours, something incredible happened. Donations started pouring in. 20 talons here, 50 pounds there. My colleagues at school organized a bake sale that raised 800 talons. The parents of my students held a car wash. Lucy ran the Manchester Marathon and collected sponsorships totaling 3,200 talents. Local businesses contributed. A restaurant in Salford held a charity dinner and donated the entire night's profits, 6,000 talents. A football club held a benefit match. Strangers who'd never met Thomas sent money with me's. Sages that made me cry. No child should have to fight alone. We're with you. Stay strong, brave boy. The Manchester Evening News picked up the story, then BBC Northwest. Suddenly, Thomas's face was everywhere, and the donations increased. Within 2 weeks, we'd raised $45,000. It wasn't enough yet, but it was hope, real, tangible hope built not on blood relations, but on human compassion. The community rallied around Thomas in ways my own parents refused to, and every single donation, every kind word, every shared post was a reminder of what family should be. Then Sarah contacted me again. Emily, I have something you need to see. Can you meet me at the cafe across from the hospital? 30 minutes later, we sat in a quiet corner booth. Sarah pushed a folder across the table. I could lose my license for this, she said, but I can't stand by and watch anymore. These are copies of communications between the hospital administration and your parents. Inside were email printouts, payment inquiry forms, and, most damningly, a recorded transcript of a phone conversation between my mother and the hospital's finance director. In it, my mother had explicitly asked whether the hospital would be willing to delay the surgery until after mid-September, when they would have more liquidity after a major family event. The finance director had explained that Thomas's condition was degenerative and time-sensitive. Waiting until September could be fatal. My mother's response was chilling. I understand, but we need to balance all of our family obligations. Can you at least explore options for extended payment plans? She'd been negotiating not to save Thomas, but to postpone his salvation until it was more convenient for her social calendar. There's more, Sarah said quietly. I did some digging. The Ashford family made a 50,000 talent donation to this hospital's cardiac wing last year. They're major donors. That's why your parents have been treating this like a business negotiation rather than an emergency. They think they can manage the situation through connections and influence rather than actual care. The betrayal was complete. I made a decision that night. I contacted James Thornton, a solicitor in Birmingham who'd made a name for himself taking on complex family law cases, particularly those involving financial abuse and neglect. When I explained the situation and showed him the evidence, his expression darkened with professional outrage. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of familial financial neglect I've seen, he said. Your parents had the means to help and explicitly chose not to. Combined with the evidence of their adoption disclosure and the pattern of treatment, we have grounds for a civil case. I don't want their money, I told him. I want justice. I want the truth to be public record. Then let's make that happen. We filed the lawsuit 3 days before Sophie's wedding. The timing was deliberate. The case made immediate headlines. Grandparents spend $190K on wedding while refusing to save grandson's life. Shocking adoption revelations emerge. The story spread like wildfire across the UK media. The Daily Mail ran a front-page spread. Morning television shows debated the ethics. Social media erupted with opinions, and the overwhelming majority sided with Thomas. My parents became pariahs overnight. G8. Their carefully constructed social reputation crumbled. The Ashfords, horrified by the negative publicity, distanced themselves from the Bennett family immediately. Sophie's wedding went ahead. It was too late to cancel, but half the guests didn't show up. Those who did attend described the atmosphere as tense and uncomfortable. the celebration overshadowed by scandal. The photos that appeared on social media were subdued, comments disabled. The hashtags were gone. Meanwhile, the crowdfunding campaign exploded. Within a week of the lawsuit being filed, we'd raised $78,000, more than enough for the surgery and post-operative care. Thomas's surgery was scheduled for mid-September, exactly when it should have been from the beginning. I held his small hand as they wheeled him into the operating theater, his brave little face looking up at me. "I'm scared, Mummy." "I know, sweetheart, but you're the bravest boy I know, and I'll be right here when you wake up. Promise?" "I promise." The surgery took 7 hours. 7 hours of pacing, praying, and occasionally crying in the hospital chapel. Lucy sat with me the entire time, holding my hand, bringing me tea I couldn't drink, just being present. When the surgeon finally emerged, still in his scrubs, his tired face broke into a smile. "Mrs. Carter, Thomas is going to be fine. The surgery was successful. His heart is beating strong and all his vitals are good. He's going to make a full recovery." I collapsed into Lucy's arms and sobbed, not from grief this time, but from overwhelming relief. The legal case went to trial in November. The courtroom in Leeds became a battleground where all the family secrets were laid bare. My barrister, Eleanor Richardson, presented the evidence methodically. The financial records showing my parents' wealth, the hospital communications proving their refusal to help, the adoption papers revealing my true status in the family, and witness testimony from Sarah and others. Sophie testified on behalf of our parents, trying to paint a picture of complexity and misunderstanding, but her words rang hollow against the documented facts. My parents' lawyer argued that they had no legal obligation to pay for their grandson's medical care, which was technically true, but as Eleanor pointed out, this isn't about legal obligation, it's about moral duty, about the fundamental expectations of family, about the choice to prioritize luxury over life. When the judge delivered his verdict, his words were measured but cutting. While the court cannot compel grandparents to provide financial support for their grandchildren's medical care as a matter of law, the evidence presented in this case reveals a pattern of emotional neglect, deliberate cruelty, and moral bankruptcy that is deeply concerning. The defendants chose extravagance over emergency, celebration over survival, appearances over their own flesh and blood. We were awarded £85,000 in damages for emotional distress and the documented harm caused by their negligence. More importantly, the verdict was public record. The truth was officially, irrevocably documented. Thomas recovered slowly but beautifully. His laughter returned, bright and pure, filling the quiet spaces that grief had occupied. Within 3 months, he was back at school, playing football with his friends, living the childhood that had almost been stolen from him, watching him run and play, seeing the healthy color in his cheeks, hearing his heart beat strong and steady during follow-up appointments. These became my daily miracles. From the ashes of betrayal, I built something meaningful. I founded a charity called Hearts Before Celebrations, dedicated to helping families facing impossible medical costs for their children when their own relatives failed them. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up. Families shared their own stories of being abandoned by relatives who prioritized material things over human lives. Within a year, we'd helped 17 families across the UK pay for life-saving treatments. Thomas came with me to fundraising events, a living testament to why the work mattered. My advocacy took me to Parliament, where I testified about the gaps in medical funding and the hidden epidemic of family financial abandonment. I haven't spoken to my parents in 3 years now. They tried to reach out once, through a lawyer, proposing a reconciliation meeting that was clearly more about salvaging their reputation than genuine remorse. I declined. Sophie sent me an email 6 months after the trial. "I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't fully understand how serious things were. I hope we can rebuild our relationship someday." I never responded. The wound was too deep, too permanent. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some relationships can't be repaired. But I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or legal papers. It's built by the people who show up when everything falls apart. It's Lucy, who held my hand through the darkest nights and never once made me feel like a burden. It's Sarah, who risked her career to tell me the truth. It's the strangers who donated their hard-earned money to save a child they'd never meet. It's the community that rallied around us when those who should have loved us turned away. That's real family. Thomas is 9 years old now, healthy and thriving. His latest dream is to become a doctor, specifically a pediatric cardiac surgeon. He wants to help other children the way he was helped. Every day with him is a gift I'll never take for granted. Every laugh, every hug, every ordinary moment is extraordinary because it almost never happened. Sometimes late at night, I think about what would have happened if the community hadn't saved us, if Thomas had died while my parents drank champagne at Sophie's wedding. I think about how they would have grieved, or pretended to grieve, while knowing they'd chosen flower arrangements over his heartbeat. And I'm grateful in a strange way that it happened this way instead, because Thomas survived. And in surviving, he proved that love, real love, always fights back. This isn't just my story. It's a story for every person who's ever been betrayed by those who were supposed to protect them, for every child whose life was deemed less important than appearances, for every family that found each other not through blood, but through compassion. If this story resonates with you, if you believe that no child should ever have to choose between life and love, then I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel, share this message, and help ensure that no family ever faces what we did alone. Together, we can be the family that shows up when it matters most. Because in the end, love isn't about biology or obligation, it's about choice. And when faced with the choice between a party and a child's life, real love knows the answer immediately. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being the kind of family the world needs more of.